President Pegley and the college for the very strong support our program gets. That's why we're able to do these kinds of wonderful programs for everybody. Particularly want to thank our dean, the Division III Dean, Linda Corbell, who is right there, and without whom we couldn't survive, because again, she's always going to back for us and supporting us. I'd like to thank Facilities Coordinator Terry Quam and all of the people in facilities who were here last night doing all of the setups across the college that you're going to be seeing. Particular shout out to College Advancement, Dorothy, Janet, Steve, everyone else in there. And I want to particularly acknowledge Nancy Nash's work. She's our lead graphic designer, and so many people have commented on the beautiful work she did on the poster and on the conference brochure. So thank you, Nancy. A special thanks to the Performing Arts Center staff, especially my good friend Tony Churchill, Matt Coy, and all the student staff who worked so hard to open up their home to WGS and make this event possible. To the Division III staff, particularly Maria Haskey and Margaret Saunders, and everyone else in the Division III office. Special thanks to the Oakton Educational Foundation, who provides such strong support to WGS programming. See, I had to write it down because there's a lot of people to thank. To Mary Hope Griffin, Angela Kuhn, and all of the other wonderful faculty who teach in the program. And most especially, I want to thank, and I'm going to refer to this so I don't forget anybody, the Women's and Gender Studies Steering Committee. These are the folks who meet all during the year, every month. You'll see them running around with staff tags. Oh, and that's another thing, by the way. If you need proof for attendance for an instructor other than just showing them your name tag, what I would suggest you do is whatever events you attend on that one-page schedule, just look for somebody with a blue staff tag and just ask them to sign it for you if you need signatures, okay? Any of them will do. They're all the steering committee. And they are Michael Anthony, Anna Cuomo Paul, Carly Drummer, Holly Graff, Greg Hamill, Lindsay Hewitt, Scott Johnson, Judy Langston, Kristen McCartney, Gary Newhouse, Denise Top-Rhine, Janet Spector Bishop, Marguerite Solari, and Marion Stats. And if any of them are here in the room, I'd like you to stand and give them a real round of applause.
Because I've been all over the world and, really been doing a lot of things through spoken word, but it means a lot to come back to the communities here and to see a progressive community talking about feminism out here in the suburbs is pretty deep and pretty amazing. So I want you to give it up for yourselves. So how I got into spoken word, all right, was a high school English teacher of mine used to sneak me and my friends into the Green Mill and the Green Mill cocktail bar in Oakton, which was not entirely legal, and I'm not sure how it all worked. But he used to sneak us in there to go see the poetry slams that still happen there every single Sunday. Make some noise if you've ever been to a poetry slam. So if you've never been to a poetry slam before, it's the Olympics of poetry, okay? Because it was started by this guy named Mark Smith, and the tradition is when you say Mark Smith, everyone's supposed to say, so what? Mark Smith? So what? I don't know, like a little more to it. Mark Smith? So what? Mark Smith? So what? Right, who was a construction worker who loved poetry but couldn't get any of his friends to come watch poetry, if you can imagine that, because people thought it was boring, it was dead, it was, written by, old dead white guys, why is anybody into poetry? But the spirit of the Poetry Slam is the fact that poetry belongs to the people. And that's what, a lot of times people get confused that, they think poetry slam, you go up and like, I'm slamming my poem and this and that. Or, I'm gonna like totally kill in this competition. But that's not what it was about. Mark Smith really wanted to make it so that, people will come to the stage and share their poems, and then just 5 random people from the audience were picked to judge whether or not those poems were good. Because the point is, poetry belongs to the people. One more time, poetry belongs to the
people.
All right, there we go. So that's kind of what I came from. And so thinking on today, I was like really into the title for this conference. It's like Futuristic Feminisms, Visionary Perspectives Across Diverse Fields, or something like that, And it's an exciting idea to me to think about where is feminism now, where can it be in the future, but equally important, this whole idea around vision and what it means to have a vision. Because if you don't have a vision for yourself and for your communities, then you're really subject to being and doing and living other people's lives. Do y'all feel me on this? Do you understand kind of what I'm saying? It's like you're very subject to what anyone else wants for you. And I think that's important, both for all of us individually, as well as thinking about, the larger scheme of things in terms of social justice. So I'm going to start off with a poem that I actually wrote when I grew up out here in the suburbs. I went to school at U of I in Champaign-Urbana. I was living on the north side and the south side of Chicago before I moved to Brooklyn. And I was working out on the west side, out in North Lawndale. And everyone knows Chicago's a very segregated city. And I thought it was really funny because when I was working out in North Lawndale, one of my students was saying to me, she's like, oh, Kelly, I'm so glad that you work here. Because before I thought there were just black people and white people. But I know there's black people, white people, and Chinese people. That's like pretty good, this is progress, moving forward. But I think that when I think about futuristic feminisms, I mean, really this idea of how do we be as inclusive as possible, right? Because how can we make feminism be inclusive of every single person in this room? And every single person in this room, and all of the people that we love, all the people that we interact with, all that we care about, right? So this is a piece I wrote about Asian American identity, and it's called Making Guacamole. Eating a guacamole taco at a taqueria in the West Side ghetto where I worked, I was suddenly sent back to the site of my sister at 12, kneeling at the kitchen counter of our parents' home. She sat scooping green slivers of avocado from out of their broken skins. Anxious and small, I would squeeze the round limes, put their juicy pulp to my tongue, plow my greedy little fingers through finely diced piles of tomatoes, onions, and peppers, hoping to be the one to mash them all together in the end. My sister and I were not trying to start a dialogue. We were not trying to be politically correct. We were not trying to bridge the gap. Looking out the restaurant's windows, I see construction workers drill away in Oakton, reminding me that white folks usually don't come here unless they're drug users, missionaries, or doctors, soon cruising away seemingly undisturbed in their shiny cars. Some days I adopt the same looks of suspicion and surprise when I see one of these outsiders walking awkwardly around the neighborhood. I wonder what they're doing here, glance at my own wrist, and realize the hypocrisy of my question, knowing that ever since I was small, I was supposed to have a color in America, which is neither black nor white. I'm not a chameleon, although sometimes I do think that I've tried to be. I'm struggling to reason what we have in common, what it could be worth, tearing away at ancient Asian histories to build the unified front of today's Asian American society. I dream of a cocky Asian nationalism when sisters wear chipaos and kimonos and our hair in those seriously funky, gravity-defying do's every single day. When we have taken all of our languages melded into one to recall us to our values and our pride. When we have a voting bloc and boycott power not to be fucked with, when our music saddled to the buck-wild backs of Asian rhythms is blared out open street windows, when somebody could say, hey, quit acting so yellow! And we both understand what that could possibly mean. When we can belong to something and it can belong to us, knowing yes, when we're proud of our accents, knowing yes, This is what American English sounds like too. When screaming out yellow and brown power could encompass all of the stories of war-torn refugees from Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Laos, of my parents who were lured here by the brain drain, of the Japanese Nisei and Issei in the American internment camps, of the Filipinos who first came to the dirty South in the mid-1700s, of the Chinese who drove the stakes into the railroads and worked alongside black sharecroppers in Mississippi, a nationalism with the weight of all of these things and more. Marking the day when my family will quit saying American when we mean white. When we will have chucked out our own sense of eternal foreignness, when we can envision the face of America as ourselves. But my life has never been that clear, that pure, that unwavering. Listening to hip-hop, I press skip past the tracks as my identity is spun as ball-busting kung fu masters or stingy Korean grocery store owners. Having grown up in the suburbs, I wonder which of my childhood friends realize that race consciousness isn't optional for everyone. I find the same values for family amongst Latinos, the same sense of guilt shared with Catholics and Jews, the same sense of insignificance shared with Native Americans and Arab Americans. If anyone were to ask me what is my community, it will be a complicated answer, coming from the lips of a child of immigrants who thought to simply exist in America was to succeed. Eating a guacamole taco at a taqueria in the West Side ghetto where I worked, I thought of my sister scooping and slicing vegetables. I thought of all of this. I thought of all kids do when left to their own devices, how there were so few boundaries for us, how we found joy in it. How something as odd as two Taiwanese girls making guacamole in the Chicago suburbs during the mid-1980s tells the story of the creeping of contacts and contexts, cultures and colors, finding homes in the foundations of our minds, creating the rituals of the community of us. Everybody doing all right? That I want to do, and I know this is like not like your regular keynote, but I kind of like, you know, this is how I see the world, this is how I process the information, and I really appreciated Kathleen's remarks at the beginning, because a couple years ago I got to perform at the World Social Forum in Nairobi, Kenya, and there was a really amazing woman who was a community development worker as well as a songwriter. And I'll never forget the words that she said. She said that, you know, artists have the job of animating the information, because without an emotional connection to information, the information dies. You see what I'm saying? And this is what I feel the work is. When I was in school, I actually studied comparative literature and urban planning, which prepares you for a career in spoken word, you know? But it was really interesting. I'll never forget in one of my urban planning classes, there was, you know, like those little infographics that are always a little bit puzzling, right? But there was this infographic that said something like, it was like a house. And at the bottom, they had human development. And on the two pillars, it was economic development and political development. And on the top was community development. And I always think of that, you know, for me as an artist, I feel like I'm still doing the same work that I thought that I was going to be doing, you know, in college. Like I thought I was going to be working in affordable housing or youth development or something like that. But I realized that with my passion, with my talents, with my weird, you know, growing up in spoken word, that the creator has kind of picked a different role for me in terms of that I could use my art to help animate the information, create an emotional connection, bring stories to life. A lot of times I think of it, you know, I like to think of my performances, I get to bring all the people that I love from all around the world right here in the room with you and to share it. And so that's a little bit the point of view that I'm coming from. Everybody doing all right? Yeah? Okay, cool. So the next piece I'm going to do, I actually wrote for a feminist anthology called We Don't Need Another Wave, Dispatches from the Next Generation of Feminists. And they asked me like, well, Kelly, you know, if you could speak to this next generation of feminists, what would you say? And I was like, well, you know, sometimes I think feminists can be the most woman-hating people of all. So there's something that to be said for really thinking about, again, how do we create and, you know, work for social justice, work and be activists, while including all the different people that we care about. So this is based on a lot of my friends, the real women in my life. So this piece is just called Real Women I Know. Real women I know have flaws, not just cellulite and acne scars or body odor or bad musical taste, but serious flaws. Flaws like cheating on our partners or stealing our best friend's lovers. Flaws like looking for what's the best inside of ourselves, inside of somebody else. Assuming crisis, assuming miracle, or assuming nothing at all. Real women I know never knew how we grew up so fast, holding fists out with eyes closed. We become wives, divorcees, widows. We become addicts, abusers, liars. We become all that we didn't understand about the adult world, shocked that the little girls in us haven't yet disappeared. Real women I know keep no good friends on the couch for months. Don't bug them about their hustling. Let them back in when they come knocking at the door. Real women I know are in therapy and madly in love with our shrinks. Happy to talk about the sad parts, sad to talk about the happy parts, sick of going on medication. Real women I know destroy ourselves through work or television, starvation, or people who refuse to treat us well. We are persistent in this effort, and yet we cannot refuse the invitation to continue on. Real women I know work thousands of miles away from home, collect breaths in a chest of drawers, pack cardboard boxes full of soap, shampoo, and candy to send home. Real women I know keep alive the economies of entire countries. Real bio females I know aren't women at all, but trans boys, gender queer, gender fluid, with short hair and button-down shirts. Genitalia only one tiny part of the gender puzzle, when the world offers so much more. Real women I know laugh in bed while smoking weed and eating Girl Scout cookies. Post diagrams for our partners on how to give oral sex properly by the bed. Real women I know have given up sex to find love, or just now remembering how it feels to sleep in bed alone. Real women I know are mothers. Unexpectedly, the babies come and teach us to stand with 2 feet on the ground, arms stretched wide open, ready for whatever arrives. Real women I know are driven into the ground eternally, never given rest. Take on everybody else's problems, never allow ourselves to give up. It's like not a normal keynote. Everybody doing all right? Yes? Yes. So the next piece I'm going to do, again, I always come in with like, I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this, this, and this poem, and then I change it all completely. So that's what's happening right now. But I want you to make some noise if you have a badass grandma.
Yes!
So when we're talking about feminism, I think it's really interesting how people always think feminism is like plowing forward, you know, forward, we're going into progress now, not like the old times, you know? But when I think about my grandmother, I think about my great-grandmother, I'm like, man, these women were doing it, you know what I mean? It's like, it's funny, because my father actually loves Barack Obama. It makes some noise if you love Barack Obama. We won't talk about current policies, but anyway, but my dad, he was like a huge supporter of Barack Obama when Barack first, ran for president, because Barack, like my dad, was raised by his grandmother. And I was like, that's so funny. It's like a raised by your grandmother vote. Because my dad has like certain values when you're raised by your grandmother. But, my dad's grandmother and my maternal grandmother, so my mom's mother, they both had their feet bound. So I'm like, this is some real shit. This really happened in China. This really happened to people in my family. My dad was saying his grandmother, her feet were only 4 inches long. But she still was able to take him to school. He said she would like smoke a pipe every day, She was running all kinds of stuff in the family. When I think about the things that my mother's mother went through, I'm like, I can hardly even manage myself. I can't even imagine, all the things that she was going through. So this piece is for my maternal grandmother. This is for my Waipua. Waipua shuffled tiny feet from the foyer to the living room. Clicked on the TV, brushed her still black hair into stiff wings. Outside, a burning heat. Chicago, in August. Waipa buttoned her shirt with arthritic fingers, removed her teeth, dropped them in a glass of water. They bounced, like she did, from one child's home to the next. Jinghua in Chicago, Suhua in DC, Weihua in San Francisco, Dai and Dazhou in Taipei. So far from being that baby girl that she was in Shanghai, the one who kicked the cloths off of her bound feet, dove into the marriage bed of her husband, birthed 6 skinny children from 7 sickly pregnancies. Children born to survive every war, running first from the Japanese, then from the communists, exiled to live in Taiwan, where Waipa rolled out dumpling dough into thin-skinned flaps, cupped each square in her palm, made every dumpling precious. Another flower blooming, its weight anchored in the center of her hand. She'd smear its pocket with meat, twist its hot clothes, and repeat until it was enough to feed 6 children, 1 husband, 1 sister, 1 brother-in-law, and eventually herself. Waipa stuffed bracelets and anklets over my baby hands and feet, laced my young neck in red thread and pure gold. Waipa saved my umbilical cord and let go of me, the child that language and migration would steal from her. It is this woman's skin that covers me, her cataract eyes that watch me from above. And then she was like, oh, so they really think you're a feminist, you know, which I thought was really funny because I was like, I never really grew up with a negative association with that. But I think for my mom, like, her mom was so old school, right? You know, like she didn't want her to work outside the house, all that kind of stuff. You know, my mom wanted to go to school and work outside the house, you know, so that was like her big departure. And I always think it's funny because my mom's always like, well, you know, because I'm a very modern woman. And I'm like, modern women don't say I'm a very modern woman. But, you know, those were the kinds of things that she was going through. And I mean, me and my, like, crazy, you know, lifestyle was a pretty, like, big departure for her, too. You know, so these questions around what is feminism? And who considers themselves a feminist? Make some noise if you feel as though you're a feminist. If you were ever taught that being a feminist was a bad thing to be. I think for me, again, I had this kind of like weird experience. You know, I was just talking with my mom last night. She's like, it's so different. People raising kids now. You know, she's like, because when you were growing up, we just took you to the library and we just left you there. You know, and then we come back and get you. And she's like, and now kids are on the internet and you don't know where they are. They could be anywhere. They could be like anything. You know, but I do remember, like, we used to go to the library, you know, the Rolling Meadows Library, actually, you know, every week. And my sister, I had an older sister, so make some noise if you're your youngest child. Yes. But, you know, so I was the youngest child, and I would always see my sister at the library check out like 15 books, you know, because she was really, really into books. She was really into reading. And being her little sister, I would always check out like 15 books, but I would never read them. And the librarian somehow always knew this. She'd be like, are you know, she'd check out my sister, and then she'd look at me, she'd be like, are you really going to read all those books? And I'm like, yeah, you know, and not read any of them. But I say all this to say that my sister is actually the one who indoctrinated me from a very early age into feminism. Because I don't even know how this is possible, but I think she was like in 8th grade and she was really into reading Ms. Magazine and all this kind of stuff. And I remember being in 3rd grade and having an assignment in class, you know, where you're writing on that long ways paper for the uppercase and the lowercase. I remember writing something like, he was a male chauvinist pig. And I spelled chauvinist S-H-O-W-V-A-N-I-S-T. And I think to this day, I'm like, what possible question could that have been the right answer to? There's no question that could have been the right answer to, you know? But it's really interesting, you know, how you kind of come up into all of this stuff. But now, you know, going down memory lane, another, you know, my sister, of course, was the first to indoctrinate me into feminism. But I guess my point being, like, you know, thinking about my grandmother, my great-grandmother, even my mother, they probably wouldn't consider themselves feminists, but there's so much that we can learn from the strength and the vision and the purpose with which they live their lives, right? So I'm really into, as of late, this question around representation versus realization. Does that make sense? Is anyone into this? Do you understand what I'm saying? You know, because you could say, like, I am a feminist, but it's like, are you living your life that way? Are you, you know, what does it mean to you to live your life that way? Sorry, I'm on a little digression. Is that okay if I go on a digression?
Yeah.
All right, so I had the chance this last fall to perform at a gala for Tyra Banks, which was like so fabulous and wonderful, and Drake was there, and it was awesome. So I was performing at this gala for Tyra Banks, and I thought it was so fascinating because when she got up there and gave her remarks, it was to raise money for this girls program on the Lower East Side called the Lower East Side Girls Club, and she has like a foundation that works with them. So fascinating. Yet Tyra Banks, beautiful, gorgeous, tall lady, getting up on stage, doing her remarks, and she said, I started America's Next Top Model. Make some noise if you watch the show. Yes, I do, you know. She's like, I started America's Next Top Model because I wanted to expand the definition of beauty in the United States. And she said, when we cast that show with 70 to 80% debatable beauties. She's like, I know you're watching that show thinking, that girl isn't even cute. And she's like, and that's the point. Because I wanted people to think about that. And that like blew my mind. Make some noise if that kind of blows your mind a little bit, or maybe just me. Is it just me? So I was like, wow, you know? I was like, I never would have thought, you know, I never really thought of America's Next Top Model in a very like intellectual way. And I wouldn't have guessed that there was a very intellectual underpinning behind it. But did I have conversations with my friends about what's beautiful? Is this girl cute? Is she beautiful? She's tall, she's skinny, she's got big ears, you know, anything, you know? That it did start that conversation. I was like, what a fascinating thing to do the work and not tell anybody, you know? And just know that you're doing that work. And not take, you know, not feeling you have to take credit for it. You know, no one's sitting here thinking, Tyra Banks, this amazing feminist, you know? Not too many people are saying that. But she knows she's doing the work. And I think that that's a really interesting thing. I think you need all kinds of people. People who are like, I'm a feminist and I do feminist work and this is okay and this is not okay. And I think that you do need people in all ranges of fields, whether you're talking about arts and entertainment, media, government, big thing, you know, for-profit sector, science, whatever you're trying to get into. We need people that, like, you know you're doing the work. You don't have to, you know, whether you want to make that external to somebody else is up to you. Is that interesting to you all? I don't know. It's interesting. Make some noise. That's interesting. I mean, that's another thing. I'm like, okay, a little addendum to that digression. Has anyone read this GQ article with Beyonce on the cover? No, only me. I'm the only one that's read this. Does anyone like Beyonce here? Yes, no? Okay, I do. I like Beyonce. But, you know, I thought it was so fascinating because of course you have Beyonce on the cover and she's like in her panties, you know, in her chonies, right? She's in her little panties and like little halfter and like sticking the booty out and all that kind of stuff and like, you know, holding the football between her breasts, you know, whatever, any number of things. If you read the article that is in GQ, she says in the article, she goes, women should make their own money. She said, it is a fact that women don't make as much money as men, you know, across the world, across the board. And people just accept that, and that's not right. She's like, that's why I've started, that's why I take myself seriously as a business person, that's why, you know, she goes at length about like her role as a business person. And so I'm really interested in this idea because it's so different from the way that I work, because I'm very like, this is me, and I'm very, you know, this is how I feel, this is who I am, and da-da, you know? But I'm really interested that that's a good way to work, but then also there's this other way to work where people are, it's basically subterfuge. Do y'all know this term, subterfuge? I had to look it up because like it's one of those words that you think that you know, and then you're like, wait, maybe I don't know what that actually means. But you know, like subterfuge is kind of this idea of doing whatever you need to do to achieve the ends that you want to, right? Again, not for everyone. But I think, again, when we're thinking about feminism and we're thinking about futuristic feminisms, there's many paths, right? So there's Angela Davis, there's Gloria Steinem, there's Bell Hooks, there's Beyonce, you know what I mean? There's many paths to what we're trying to do, right? And so I'm just really interested in that idea. Once again, she knows she's in her panties on the cover, but she also knows that in the article, she controlled the talking points and she wanted to talk about the fact that there's income inequity across the board for women. Interesting. Lots of ways to do this. Any way you want to do it, you can do it. So as many people as we have in this room is as many feminisms as we have. Thinking of different kinds of feminisms, you know, so I was in high school from 92 to 96. I know it's really unbelievable because I look so young. yes, I know. But during that time, it was like how many of you, older folks in the crowd probably know this, younger folks, how many people know who Courtney Love is? Okay. So most, I think, younger people who know who Courtney Love is you just know she's like a hot mess, right? That's all she is. She's just a hot mess. So when I was in high school, like Courtney Love was like the ultimate to me because she was a part of this movement that was called the Riot Girl movement. Make some noise if you're familiar with the Riot Girl movement. So the Riot Girl movement was a movement that was happening in the 90s, really close to like grunge music and like punk rock and all this kind of stuff that was happening. And it's like, you know, girls in the Riot Girl movement, you know, it's like the lipstick just smeared all over the face and there's like guitars, and combat boots, you know? And you just could be, you know, so different from, you know, for example, it's interesting, you know, my English name, Kelly, means like, in Gaelic, it means maiden warrior, you know? And then my Chinese name, which when you pronounce it as Gernyi, actually means like kind and polite with good posture. I was like, that's so like my mom. Like if you're gonna name anybody anything and want to bestow something onto them, like kind and polite with good posture. So of course, like the Riot Girls, was totally the opposite of like kind and polite with good posture. So this is a piece that I wrote about when I was growing up in high school with my friends and Courtney Love and the Riot Girl movement. This piece is just called Suburbia. Live through this and me, I swear that I would die for you. We were hot, dorky, bookworm girls. So over the cups of tea we drink late nights, all night, at the Denny's in Palatine, the Denny's in Barrington, or the Spring Garden with its mirrors bent, pink and green flowers and foot-tall cakes iced and melting in the front room case. Live through this and me, I swear that I would die for you. 1.5 Jews, maybe all of us lesbians in the end. 1 Chinese girl, the rest Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, Polish, German, Egyptian, Mexican, Indian. 1 girl from Albuquerque, and I don't know, another one from California. All listening to Courtney Love, scratching out essays about eating disorders, etching the outlines of our bodies in the snow, tall tales of abuse that went so often unheard, fist pounding the bedroom wall, her father's hands around her throat with all those rings, all those gold and diamond rings. 1 Chinese girl who couldn't stay out after 11 o'clock at night unless she lied all night in platform sneakers and gold lycra dresses, drooling asleep in Wicker Park warehouse raves, outcast still at Skater Kids, Golden Nugget, 4 a.m. breakfasts, outcast still, lesbians never out, outcast still, rapes never spoken, misunderstood, outcast still, the drifting, the disappeared, the hating on, ripping apart, disintegrating out of suburban dementia, outcast still, no catch-up on the phone even 10 years later, and we were the smart girls. The smart girls. We girls who came from Janet Jackson, Tori Amos, and Mary J. Blige. We girls who came from We Might Be Giants, A Tribe Called Quest, and Shonen Knife. We girls who came to Courtney Love, Courtney Love, Courtney Love. Before plastic surgery, before Larry Flint, before Kurt's brains blown. No grieving, no glamour, no Prada. Just torn lace dresses, combat boots, and eyeliner smeared like the shadow of atomic holocaust. Sweating heroin death, unstrapping her guitar, thrashing. my parents in the suburbs, I'm like, so tranquil. It's like so quiet, it's so chill, you know, everyone's just like eating. You know, I was just thinking, it's like New York, it's like, you know, everybody wants to be famous. One of my friends who just moved from Chicago, she's like, yeah, just everybody wants to be famous, you know, and it's like, where people are like starting a blog so they can be famous, but everyone's so lonely. That's like the New York lifestyle. But, you know, but it's interesting because I remember it so differently as a young person. I remember just so many things that were happening. The life was so chaotic in a way that on the surface everything looked fine. But then I remember, you know, stories of like people's parents like fighting all the time, or stories of abuse. There were a lot of drug problems. I don't know about your high school, but I know my high school. I mean, there was a kid that, you know, died from a heroin overdose the year after me. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that was going on. And so I think it's a real interesting question that sometimes people will think that, like, you know, as compared to like city life and suburban life is somehow like quiet and happy and picket fences and all that kind of stuff, you know? But I think that, again, when we're thinking about feminism and we're thinking about activism, what is the change that we can make when we're here? Are these digressions okay?
Yes.
Yeah, because, you know, so another New York thing is you become a crazy yoga lady because everyone's like so stressed out all the time. Like New York has all these weird things because everyone's so stressed out and running around, so that everybody does yoga and everybody's in therapy, you know, because there's just too much happening, you know? People just need to chill out, you know? So I'm like a crazy yoga lady, and I was at a yoga class yesterday, and I remember, it made me remember, like, you know, of course when I was a teenager here, like, the thing I wanted most in life was just to leave. I just wanted to leave the suburbs. I don't know if anyone makes some noise. Woo! How do I get out of here, right? And so I was like, how do I get out of here? You know, and being in that class, it reminded me how it felt, you know, because the other women who were of my age in this class, you know, everyone was like blonde and like kind of Barbie-like, you know. And, but what was really fascinating is they started talking at the end of class just about how girls dress in high school now. And then one woman was like, yeah, I saw this one girl, and I was like, how did her mother even let her out the house, you know? And then this other woman said, she's like, yeah, and you know what happens, you know, when you dress a certain way, you invite, you know, kind of people looking at you a certain way, you know, she's like, and then, you know, bad things happen, you know, she's like, I'm just saying, you just, you know, if you dress that way, you kind of have to expect that something like that's going to happen. And I was just like, whoa, you know? Because again, it's very, if I was here when I was in high school and heard that lady, I probably would have gotten in a full-out fight with her. Being like, that's so wrong, and that's totally like just subscribing to rape culture, and you're, you know, being so closed-minded, and you're blaming the victim and all of this. But being how I am, you know, having the life experiences that I've had in some time in separation, I started to look at that woman in a different way, and I'm like, she's trying to survive. She's not thinking, I'm going to change all of patriarchy, I'm going to change all of these people, I'm going to change the world. She's thinking, I'm trying to keep myself and my physical body safe. And I think for us that are committed to social justice, for those of us who are committed to activism, for those of us who have the benefit of coming to things like this, to be thinking about these different ideas, we have to understand that not everyone has those privileges. Not everyone has that space. So make some noise if you're appreciative of this space. And then part of our work is, well, how do we advocate on behalf of? How do we work towards? How do we create a situation so that for this young woman, that she doesn't have to think that she's just like kind of this walking piece of meat, you know what I mean? If you don't cover it up, someone's gonna pounce on you, you know, and then it'll be your fault. I mean, that's a crazy way to have to live. But she's trying to survive, and I get that, you know? Everybody still with me? Yes? Okay, cool. So, changing it up. Okay, we are at, yeah. So, again, I keep on changing like my set list for what I'm gonna do with you all. Okay, I'm gonna do this piece instead. All right, everybody, okay, yeah. So this piece actually, this next piece I'm gonna do, I actually wrote for a hip-hop theater show that was here in Chicago. It was like 3 years ago or something like that. And me and my collaborators, we were working on this show, and it was like about race, gender, media, and the other. And so, you know, we spent like all this time just thinking about like, you know, the other, you know, all these different ideas around how each of us, you know, my collaborators were both like men of color, like are so marginalized from mainstream American culture. So make some noise if you've ever felt marginalized by mainstream American culture. We're all so into digressions today. Is that all right? Yes. Yes. Who watches Dr. Oz? Anybody? Yes? No? I'm not really that into it because it's always like 15 ways to eat healthier pizza. I'm just not that into it. But, you know, I happened to, because I was hanging out with my parents, I was like, I happened to catch it, and like Charlie Sheen was on the show. Okay? Which again, hot mess. Like that's the definition right there. Charlie Sheen, hot mess, right? But it was so fascinating. Dr. Oz is talking to Charlie Sheen around like this kind of like, almost from this health perspective. You know, like, what's up with you sleeping with all these people? Let's talk about that as a health issue. Or how about you doing crack cocaine? You know, like, what does that do to your body, right? But it was really interesting because Charlie Sheen was talking there, you know, which obviously, you know, being on 2.5 Men, that's about as mainstream American culture as you could get. Wildly successful show. Probably one of the most watched shows ever, which I don't understand. But obviously, people get something out of it. And it was interesting because he was like, you know, he's like, you know, when you're working on a show like that and it's so much, you know, pressure and there's so much money and you're like one of the biggest stars in the world and you just have to do the same thing over and over and over again. He's like, they want you to stand in this one place and you're saying these words and they're not even your words and you just kind of become this machine to have to like keep doing it. And I was like, that's so interesting, because you would look at someone like Charlie Sheen and think, like, here's a white male who's on this huge mainstream television show, who could be more empowered than that guy? But, you know, for him, he was also locked into this machine around, you know, how these different, you know, media images get created. That gave him no space to actually really be someone. You know, this, of course, being from his perspective, which, you know, is a little tricky in terms of reliable narrator and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, but it's an interesting question to really think about, you know, because as a lot of artists that I know, we talk about, you know, art heals the artist first, and then, you know, it heals the audience. And so this question of, like, what is being created in mainstream media. I mean, another, you know, digression that's interesting, knowing people that work in television development. One woman that I know who'd been, you know, working on some development deals with the HBO Cinemax, she was talking about the fact, she's like, well, most of the executives are white men that are in their 50s or 60s. She's like, but what's interesting is that they're not even creating content for themselves. You know, what on television is geared towards a white man who's 50 or 60 years old? You know, but they're kind of creating content for this perceived idea of who's the buyer. And did you know, tell me if you knew this, that a lot of times content on television is geared towards an 18 to 39 male demographic. And they focus it on a male demographic because they say that women are so used to identifying with male characters on screen that there's not even a point of trying to do a female-driven show. So if you do a male-driven show, you'll get the men and the women, because the women are used to not seeing themselves, right? But if you, you know, and if you have a, we could get in a long conversation with that, but everyone understand where I'm going with this digression? Yeah. Yes? Okay. So this piece I wrote, you know, just thinking about all these issues around culture and media and gender, and I was like, you know, I'm so sick and tired of thinking about all the ways that myself and other people that I care about are marginalized by mainstream American media. I was like, I would like to think of myself as the center of everything in the universe just for one day. And I wrote this piece. This piece is called Self-Centered. If I could be the center of everything for a day, everything would be aimed towards, dictated by, catered to, tailored for 5'2" tattooed Asian females. When you turned on the television, no Martha Stewart, no Tom Brokaw, Katie Couric, or Stephen Colbert, just 5'2" tattooed Asian females giving makeup tips for the Asian eye. Instructions on how to raise children multilingually in America, advertisements for custom-designed builders who retrofit houses for the fabulously petite, news that tells of the latest community organizing campaigns, and where the hottest DJ set is for that night. Everything catered to me. All of the movies would tell the stories of wayward, liberated, activist, brainiac single girls and our pot dealer MC boyfriends, healing wounds with family members overseas while fighting for fair wages for factory workers around the world, which would be easy, since all all of the governments would be run by 5'2" tattooed Asian females. We'd wave to the cameras enthusiastically, give out free sandwiches to the entire world every Wednesday. We'd match our lip gloss to our fair trade boots and throw a dance party every time we signed a truly revolutionary bill. And I'd get to ask people dumb questions all day. Because isn't everybody a 5'2" tattooed Asian female? And isn't it so great to be us? But you know what? I might let you, non-5'2", non-tattooed, non-Asian, non-females, I might let you keep your languages. I might give you equal access to education and healthcare too. I might even share the airwaves and our houses of government. Give you a shot at working your way up in our financial institutions, because I know that there is no you without me. And from the only to the other, I know there's no me without you. When we're talking about racism, we're talking about classism, we're talking about homophobia, we're talking about transphobia, all these different kinds of discriminations that we go through. And in my mind, a lot of it's like narcissism, that you are the center, you are the focus, that for you, nothing else in the world matters. Everything should be catered to you. And I say to people a lot of times, for me, the experience of being a woman, the experience of being Asian American, the experience of growing up in the United States, those things, sure, they're important to me, but what's more important to me is the metaphor of that experience. Especially because I'm a poet. It's all about the metaphor of that experience. And for me, the metaphor of that experience is so much around invisibility. I speak so much and so loudly because no one ever expected me to, right? No one ever expected me to. But I knew that there was something in me that yearned to speak. Even now when I perform, I have had people tell me that they say, I didn't know what was going to happen when you got on stage. Because I don't think they've ever seen an Asian woman speak before. They've only seen Asian women like do kung fu, or like maybe a news reporter, or like they've literally never seen an Asian woman speak before, let alone saying the kinds of things that I am saying. I remember even being a kid, like in elementary school, and riding the bus. I was yelling at this one kid. I totally remember. He still lives out here in the suburbs somewhere. This kid, Jimmy Belknap. I totally remember. So he was like yelling at me or something, and then I yelled back at him, and he just said to me, he's like, I thought you people were supposed to be quiet. I don't know. I can't, but I think it's really interesting. It's kind of, again, this experience of invisibility. So for me, it's not just about, that piece is like tongue-in-cheek and fun, and like, if people like me took over the world, what would it be like? But for me, growing up, I know that there's so many people who are not paid attention to. I know there's so many people who are not given voice. I know there's so many people who are told that they are insignificant for so many different reasons. I know there's so many people who are lied about, or that there's just a vacuum of history or information. If it happens to me, I'm not the only one it's happening to. If I have the chance to speak, I will speak for myself and for as much as I know about the world, and continue, ever, ever, ever continuing to expand that reach of what it is that I know. Does everybody feel me on that?
Yeah.
Continuing to expand the reach on what you know. Because what happens, and when we're talking about this idea of a futuristic feminism, right? People kind of get locked into what was their moment, right? Their political moment, their political time. I love the fact that even though I'm in my 30s now, I get to interact with younger people all of the time, because younger people are teaching me. You are teaching me all of the time of what you don't take, that there's certain things that you just see as normal and natural. I know for me, growing up, like in terms of like feminism, it was a lot about, just thinking about women's issues. And now I have a lot of friends, and continually when I'm meeting with younger audiences, that the idea of really trying to include transgender communities inside of feminism is something that's much more like a natural thing for people. It's still not, it's still a huge challenge inside of feminism, even the term itself, feminism, right? Are we talking about a biologically determined sex? Are we talking about the social ways that gender is constructed? Are we talking about gender expression and where we are in the scale of like femme to butch? There's like so many different things to think about. And again, spaces like this, we have the privilege to think about it. Because when you're in the real world, I mean, not that this isn't the real world, but when you're in the world that where people care about these things at all, then you're really tested. And so that's why I think it's important. Sure, now you're in college now, right? And for folks who work here, you're academics and this is your job, but it's always about continuing the reach of what it is that we know, so that you don't become irrelevant. I would just like to say this. So my boyfriend's a DJ, right? And he always says that people get caught into a musical moment in time based off of when they started having sex. So comparatively speaking, in terms of politics, don't get caught into that moment. I don't know if that's not appropriate to say this early in the morning, but I don't know. Yeah, he told me to go for it.
Hey,
so
go for it.
I've just been going for it. Everybody doing all right?
Yeah.
So we're at 10:15. We got to wrap here at 10:45.
You got a little bit, and then if you want to leave time for Q&A.
And we want to do some Q&A.
Yeah. So
caring and sharing.
Yeah.
So get ready to care and share. Okay, so I'll do a few more poems for you all. I'm going to do two pieces that I actually don't usually do. I don't usually do. That I just really felt. Oh, three pieces. Or we'll see how it goes. But this is a piece that I wrote quite a while ago, like 2007. I remember that there was a story about a young woman, a Muslim woman who had boarded a plane with her baby, and there was explosives in the milk bottle, but TSA had stopped them, right, before they got on the plane. Does anyone remember this story? I know some of you are so young that you may not remember it. And I know in some ways you can look at that and just be like, of course, there's so much Islamophobia, and people, are always like linking, Muslims these days with violence, which of course is patently untrue. But when I thought about that young woman, and again, connecting this to feminism, when I thought about that young woman, I was thinking, what could she be experiencing that for her, the most powerful way that she can contribute to the world that she cares about is by going on this suicide mission with her child? Like, what is her life like? So not like a lot of the stuff in the news that I read was like, this crazy lady and these crazy Muslims, and all that kind of stuff. But I just was really curious about her, like, if we understand that everyone is right and reasonable in their own minds, and if you go through your own, your level, your different experiences lead to the decisions that you make. It just made me really curious about her. So again, this question when you think about vision and how you enact that vision. There's so many ways that she could have tried to enact that vision, and I'm not advocating this clearly, but to make that kind of gesture is a very big one. So this piece is just called To Be a Martyr. To be a martyr, you must believe in something so unmistakably that the flesh falls away from the skeleton. Bones crumble into air. All you are left with is spirit, pure spirit. You let go of resurrections, rebirths, mad dash escapes. You accept finality, the blinding of the light. You are truly committed. And for the newspapers that paint you as a mad woman, and all the detractors who could not believe how heartless and cruel this foreign woman was. And isn't it always a foreign woman? How she didn't love the child she held in her arms, carried in her own belly 9 months before. How she would just as soon blow the child to bits as guide her nipple into its mouth. How she filled the baby bottle with lotion fit for explosion, and they and the plane would have gone down in charred flames. the mystery wafting over the Atlantic, of how this woman could have ever loved this child, to kill in the name of jihad. But I say it was not quite that. It's never anything so impersonal. No, I say it was right there, under her shirt, along the breast, tucked into her baby's mouth, as clean as the milk that leaked from her chest, as natural as the baby's skull against her shoulder. Something as close as this made her do it, without hesitation, confident that this life, this way, was not worth living for all. Yeah, so I mean, it's just something to think about. Once again, you know, for as many, I mean, it ties into like everything that I've been talking about, just the idea of trying to widen, broaden, reach, and understand. And I really feel like my role as an artist is really about developing empathy and trying to understand other people, trying to jump into their experience, and what better way for us to move forward in the work that we're doing, no matter what. Like, my sister is a computer programmer out in the Bay Area, right? So make some noise if you're studying computers or not computer programmers. Well, okay, one person, yes. Oakton, community college, hey! But, you know, my sister is so hilarious. She's very ones and zeros, you know, and my boyfriend's always like, does she think that she's a computer, you know? And she said to me, she's like, well, you need to deal with the emotions because you're an artist, but, you know, her husband's also a computer programmer. She's like, but me and John, we're not artists, so we don't really have to deal with emotions. And I was like, God! You know, that's one way to live. But, you know, if you want to be a full person and develop your humanity, I think a lot of times after you leave college, no one is going to be asking you to do that. You see what I'm saying? No one is going to ask you to develop your emotional life or your human life, you know, if not your social circle, or if not, you know, for yourself, your spiritual life. And those things are really important as you move forward. So, so I'm going to do this piece. I'm going to do two pieces from, this is from a solo show I'm about to work on, and then I'm going to close with a solo show that I'm currently touring. I'm questioning whether that's a good one to close on, but we'll see how that works. Yeah, so everybody still with me?
Yes!
So, of course, being away from Chicago is an interesting experience right now, especially with everything that's going on in the news with the violence that's going on in Chicago, right? I have friends who grew up in some of like the grittiest, grimiest neighborhoods in Brooklyn, and they are like, oh no, I would never go to Chicago. They're like, that shit sounds crazy. One of my friends said to me, he's like, that Jennifer Hudson thing? He's like, that Jennifer Hudson? He's like, that's crazy. I'm never going to Chicago, you know? But I think it's a real question, you know? It's a real question of really thinking about, and again, how do these things get positioned in the media? And how do we learn to broaden the reach of our experience and understand that for ourselves, right? For me, growing up in the suburbs and then going to work out in North Lawndale was a huge education. It was a huge education. When I stepped into Manly High School and I saw the, you know, the kinds of things that the kids had to go through, like the, you know, the police at the door, the checking the bags, the fact that one kid was getting straight C's, and one of my friends who was the teacher there was like, I know you can do better than this. She's like, because it's so hard to be so consistent. You know, it's so hard to just get straight C's all the time. And he was saying, look, if I get better than this, I'm going to get my ass beat every day. I'm not doing it. Completely different from the experience I had, you know, growing up. When I was working with the kids out there, there was like a whole like, there was a whole situation in terms of like gang infighting that was happening in terms of people who were being released from prison and then trying to reestablish their position in the gangs. So the young people that I would talk to, they, like every week somebody was dying. Every week somebody, you know? And I realized I'm like, they became poets because they had to write so many eulogies for their friends, for people they loved, for who they cared about. And a lot of times, you know, especially being in New York, it's like, I'll read the paper, and the way it's written, it's like, you know, these crazy kids on the South Side, these kids are like out of control, you know, violence. But, you know, who is talking about the demolition of public housing and how that affects gang territories? Who is talking about the fact that 61 schools are being closed, affecting 30,000 kids? What's going to happen to that? You know, and then on the flip side, then you have, you know, politicians embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars so they can buy Rolexes and make cakes. We can blame the kids, but as adults, I think there's some self-reflection that needs to happen. And not just from people that are in the city, but in the suburbs too. I was reading a great article that was in The Atlantic. There was an interview with a guy who works at UFC at their crime lab. There's a gun shop in Riverdale that's been linked to something over like 1,200 guns that have been used in the Chicago city limits over the last 6 years. Used in crimes. Not just guns that people have. Guns that have been used in crimes. That gun shop is still open. Right? So we can say it's because of these kids. We can say it's because of the gangs. We can say it's because of this, you know, people in the city, and that has nothing to do with the suburbs, because it's just not the case. It's not so. So this is a piece I actually wrote. So this is just a very beginning monologue. And for me as an artist, it's like, well, how do I get into this story? What is my relationship to it? And I met a young woman when I was performing in Chicago a couple years ago. I was performing. Is this interesting? Okay. So I'm an entertainer. I like people to be entertained. So I was performing at this event that was for young activists, right? It was kind of like a gala event honoring young activists. And I saw this young woman come in. Beautiful young woman of color, very tall, very bright lavender suit, crazy makeup. And I was like, who is this lady? You know? I'm like, who is dressing like this? Because she looks so young. And then when I talked to her, and then she said she was a field reporter for NBC. I was like, oh, that's why you're dressed like that, because you're on the news, you know what I mean? You know how they're all dressed, whatever. And so we were having this conversation. I was like, well, how do you like it? How do you like, you know, working in the news? She's like, oh, it's good. You know, she's like, it's, you know, like I just graduated from journalism school, and I'm really excited, you know, to like do all this, and I have to, you know, decide where I want to go with my career, you know. And she's like, but I might, you know, I'm out on the streets a lot, you know, because you're a field reporter and you get sent out, you know. And she's like, so most of the time when I'm covering your shootings, you know, she's like, it's really depressing, but you know, you just kind of keep going. And it was just amazing to me. Just the disconnect, for me, the disconnect between what she was saying and how she was saying it. So the next solo show that I'm going to write, so kind of keep a lookout on for this. It'll probably be premiering next year, hopefully sometime somewhere in Chicago. So I wrote it, I was like, oh, okay. I was like, you know, it connects for me because, you know, again, when I say that as a young person, no one ever thought like an Asian American woman had anything to say or anything to share or contribute. But the one Asian American woman that I did grow up seeing and watching was Connie Chung. You know, so everyone was like, oh, you should be like Connie Chung, you know? So this piece is going to be a young Asian American woman who actually grows up in the suburbs but then starts working as a journalist and is covering all these shootings. And so she's up close and personal with what's happening and doesn't really quite know what to do with that. The show is going to be called Tonight at 10, but this monologue is just a piece, kind of a working piece that kind of outlines the idea of the show. It's just called 509 Caskets. Flame Blagojevich. Barack Obama's blessings. Burst basement pipes. Murder. Vigil. Candlelight. I make these tongue twisters of my old reports, even my student ones, to get my speed, my agility faster. I'm at the point where I have to decide whether I'll go national or stay local. They're two totally different tracks, you know. I went to journalism school at Northwestern, and unlike a lot of my classmates, I started working right away. I'm still living with my parents in Deerfield, but I'm going to move to the city as soon as I can. It's honestly a lot of work. I got this lavender suit over at Bloomie's, and I can't remember the last time I left the house without concealer on. You know, always have to be camera ready. It'll be nice one day when I can finally sit behind the news desk and read from the teleprompter. Lucky me. I'll probably have to wait for Linda Yu or Nisita Kwan to die off. I mean, I've had too many of them telling the news all at once, you know. In rotation, in succession, you have to wait your turn, you know. I never wanted to be a newscaster. What I really wanted to be was a veterinarian instead. Giving heartworm pills to dogs, sticking sticking IVs into dead cats to be able to go home since there really are no major emergencies with golden retrievers. But as they say, the news never stops, and I'm getting better on camera, more confident. I keep slurring my S's and L's. When I first started, there have been 6 slayings on the like last losing season of the White Sox. Bulls leap large, scaffolding swings off skyscrapers. Always have to keep smiling. In a serious way, though. Most of my assignments now are shootings. It's really depressing. Sometimes I get there fast enough to see the body. Sometimes it's just cops, family, friends, people on the block who want to get onto camera. Englewood, Little Village, Garfield. If I told you what I see on an average week, it'd probably make you want to throw up right here on the spot. Even if it's a cold summer or a hot summer, a freezing winter or a mild one, I will still be there in my pantyhose, like the Postal Service, through rain, sleet, or snow, with my hair done, makeup ready, ready to report for you, in a way that you can handle it. Face smashed down in asphalt. Boys killed execution style and thrown into garbage can. Mother and child offed by ex-boyfriend. 509 caskets in Chicago this year, and I feel like I saw them all. Limp, waiting to be carried off. The cops who don't know anything, don't find anything. Everyone on the street, curious but close-lipped until I and the cameras are gone. Lucky for you, you get to watch it from your living room. That is, if it's not outside your window. Oh, gotta run. Duty calls. That. We're going to be developing that for Chicago, and I'm really excited to bring that to the world. But now for something completely different, and I'll just close out with this, and then we'll have a little time to talk. I'm actually working on a solo show right now that's called Formosa, that is based on the history of Barbie doll manufacturing in Taiwan. Yes. So my family is from Taiwan, which is a small island off the southeastern coast of China, which I always joke that China says it's going to blow up, but they're trying to like bomb it, but don't worry, it hasn't happened yet. They say that all the time. So this piece, it really deals with a lot of these issues around gender and body and culture. And when I thought about my experiences around gender and body and culture, there's one way of looking at it in terms of this very like kind of white standard of beauty. And then there's kind of this very like hip-hop standard of beauty with like the big booty girls and all of this kind of stuff. And I think for me and all my different cultural influences, I get confused in terms of, you know, which thing is more oppressive to me. But we're actually going to be doing a presentation of this over at Columbia College in Chicago on April 16th. So I hope you can come through. It's free. It starts at 6:30, and there's 4 different characters in the show. But I'm just going to share a short monologue from one of the characters who's like an Asian American Nicki Minaj copycat female MC, and her name is Harajuku Barbie Maybe. Okay, so get ready.
And I'm all up in the bank with a funny face, and I'm a fake. If I'm fake, I ain't noticed because my money ain't. It's Barbie, bitches! I'm about to be the next young Nicki. You just wait and see. My name? Harajuku Barbie Maybe. Yeah, so when I signed with the record label, they bought me a new ass. Nice, right? I mean, how else are you gonna have the world listening to an Asian female MC? You know, walks like a duck, talks like a duck, just follow the basic ass. For weeks after the surgery, I was laid out, flat on my stomach, eating cheese fries that they brought me from the bodega. That anesthetic was making me have mad, crazy dreams, like I dreamt that my ass was talking to me.
Harajuku Barbie Maybe?
Yes, ass?
I want to thank you. All our lives we've been
sucking cheese fries, right? I know I'm telling you all this, but shh, it's a secret. I had to sign that and like a million other confidentiality agreements. One about all my other surgeries, one about where my family's actually from, another one about how old I am, a really thick one about how I'm not supposed to tell anybody in the whole wide world that the pres of the record label, Mr. Smarter, is actually gay. Oops. One about how much money I'm making, because I'm not really making any money yet. Oh, Pam, that pussy. Ha, that pussy, Pam, 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 Pam. Yeah, it's my favorite song too. Oh no, it was easy. Just a couple slits in the thighs, couple bags of silicone, skinny the nose, roll back the eyelids, caps on the teeth. Kind of makes up for all those years that kids called me dog-eating, dog-faced, dog girl. Where are those assholes now? Sucking on an exhaust pipe or a CEO's dick if they're lucky. Was it too big of a price to pay? Hey, I didn't like any of that shit my mom gave me anyway. Hold up, you think that I'm a whore? Let me tell you something. There's a big difference between seeming like a whore and actually being one. Yo, DJ, turn that music up. So